You will recall that TADA stands for Turkish Anti-Defamation Alliance, which is a group of people dedicated to creating a platform where everyone is welcome to talk about what's in their minds regarding ethnic experiences, defamatory or salutary, including current events with perspective of history. We are delighted to have our viewers come on up, and you are invited, and join us and chat with us. You may reach us by writing to us or calling as shown at the bottom of your screen. Joining us today are Hacıbey Çatalbaşoğlu, who, at least in my book, is the youngest Turkish person who is running for public office and creating a buzz, I might say, in political circles in Connecticut. Professor Robert McKay, who's on my left, whom you may recall from the last forum, will tell us more about Hacıbey, and of course you will hear from Hacıbey himself. Bülent Doğruyol, also from Connecticut, will join in the current politics in the state of Connecticut. Bülent is also treasurer of TADA. After a short break, Enis Pınar, director of communications of TADA, will talk about, if not a current, but a recent event that took place in Washington, D.C. You'll be hearing for the first time the other side of the story, which to our knowledge hasn't been acknowledged heretofore in this country. I can assure you that it's an eye-opener, so stay tuned. After another short break, Professor McKay will connect recent events in D.C. to the events that took place in Anatolia, present-day Turkey, that is, more than a century ago. So there's a connection. During the First World War, with a perspective of history, he will tell us how that connection is and what the origins of this dispute is. So we'll start with current events summarized, then go into the recent events, and then on to a century-old events. So Bob, I understand you have known Hacıbey from the day he was born. Can you tell us more before Hacıbey tells his own story, what he is doing currently?
I'd be delighted to, but first I want the audience to know that I appreciate the invitation from Sevgin Bey to be here with you, because what is being done here is unique and a wonderful thing. So I think many in the community thank you very much. Many people throughout the United States and the world know about one of the most famous universities in the United States, known as Yale. And here we have Hacıbey is the son of a pizza maker. Well, that's not entirely fair, because his dad is far more than that. He started numerous businesses, interacted with the community in a very positive way. And when he holds an event at his house, the mayor of New Haven, Connecticut, feels that she should be at his events. So it's just a very unique person, because here you have a first-generation person coming over, trying very hard to start businesses in New Haven and in Connecticut that no other Turk has done, because he was one of the first ones here. But he was successful, and he had a son, Hacıbey, and much to his dad's pride and his mother's pride, he was accepted at Yale University.
And our pride.
Everybody's pride. I mean,
Yes.
It's just such an amazing thing. It's one of the greatest schools. And so here we have a young Turkish man who's being given the greatest opportunities in America for growth. And he has community concerns himself, and he's doing something that I really haven't seen very many college people do. He's running for office in the city of New Haven, and So here you have this huge international institution that interfaces with the community, and you have one of its students, Hacıbey, running for political office. Now, before I turn the floor over to him and we ask a few questions, you know, like what his motivations are and things like that, I would say that if anyone is able to hear this broadcast, you know it costs money to run for office. And Hacıbey is going to have to raise money also. Now, that's not the purpose of our program, to raise money, but I'm sure anybody in the Turkish community or anybody in the Yale community that wants good representation in New Haven may look for Hacıbey in the election. And we hope to get financial support and voting support for this young Turkish man who comes from a wonderful family.
And if I may add, as far as the donations are concerned, you should be seeing at the bottom of your screen a place where you can get in touch with his campaign office and do the donations. So all that information should be appearing at the bottom of the screen.
So, Haji, let me ask you, well, I've known you since you were probably 3 or 4 years old, and I've known different places of you gone. I never thought you had interest in politics. What happened?
Well, before I answer your question, Bob, I'd firstly like to thank you for such a beautiful introduction. You really flatter me. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Oktay for inviting me here today to speak and introduce myself to the broader Turkish community. Growing up, I had never thought about seeking political office. However, growing up, I have noticed certain deficiencies in my city and things that I thought could be improved upon in terms of the interaction between such a large and powerful institution and the city that it's home to. And after being admitted to this institution, I thought that I could bring a unique perspective to the city in that there aren't many people, or any for that matter, on the board that I'm seeking election to who were born and raised in New Haven and currently go to Yale University.
What kind of political office is it, Hacıbey, that you're running for?
So the position I'm running for would be Alder of Ward 1. New Haven is divided up into 30 different wards, and in terms of terminology, a ward is basically the same thing as a district within a city. And the Board of Alders is the board that drafts legislation. And you can kind of think of it simply as the Congress of the city. They approve the budget that the mayor writes up. They put forth certain laws that they pass themselves, and a plethora of other responsibilities. But that Alder is the position I'm seeking.
Do you have a political affiliation?
I am running as an independent at the moment for a variety of reasons. One of them being the general election is in November, whereas the primary is in September. And from a strategic point of view, running in the general instead of the primary would give me more time to canvass to the students who get back from summer 2 weeks before the primary.
Just out of curiosity, what percentage of Yale students vote? Do you have a high voter turnout among the students?
Ward 1 is historically known for not having a particularly high turnout for Yale students, and that is in large part due to the fact that a lot of the students at Yale do not have the same connection to the city as I do. And that's one of the biggest things, if not the biggest, that I hope to change. I hope to change that culture within the student body. I want to make it so that students do want to get involved, are proactive about bringing forth change to the city.
That's so needed, Hacıbey, because as we see in recent national elections, that not just students, but voter turnout is going down and down because of many reasons. But I think when people are inspired, if there's some goal that they feel is important, I think they will come out and vote. What types of things do you think would interest Yale students?
So that's the question that I've been battling with my team for the past 6 months. How do we make it so that Yale students want to be involved with the city? Because you face this conundrum, right? You have a group of some of the most talented and intelligent people in the country in such a small ward that just, for some reason, doesn't necessarily care about where they're going to school. And the biggest way to do that, or the best way to do that, I suppose, would be to try and create this bridge between the two. Create a bridge between Yale University and New Haven. And I feel like I'm a symbol of that bridge. And this campaign is a symbol of this bridge, that we can indeed bring the two together. So one thing that I would propose working on is, there's a new boathouse in New Haven that's being built. I am on the rowing team at Yale, and I proposed to some of my
athlete too, right?
yeah, I proposed to some of my teammates creating a program where you would go and teach kids from New Haven how to row, and after teaching them how to row, get off the water and help them with their academics. So it'd be a two-pronged program, and that's one way I could slowly but surely build that bridge between two entities.
Have you tried bribing them with tasty pizzas, maybe?
Well, I will say pizzas, everyone loves pizzas, but I haven't tried bribing anyone with pizzas yet. What I have done is I've talked to the director of this program, who also was a rower at University of Pennsylvania, and I got his blessing, and he said that he would definitely love to work with the Yale crew team and heavyweight crew team and create such a program.
I've got a very important political, very charged, electric political question that I'd like to ask. I don't know if you can answer it or not, but I'm going to ask it. Which rowing team is better, Harvard or Yale?
Ooh, that's a tough one, though. Well, I mean,
Marist College.
in fact, I'll abstain from the question, but I will say one thing, and that's that Yale University were the national champions in rowing last year. That's all I need to say. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. But past performance is not always what the future performance might be, right?
Exactly.
So they have to work harder.
I had no say in the past performance of Yale University's crew team.
The reason I asked the political affiliation is after the last election, you know, the Democratic Party is trying to invigorate their base, and they have several organizations who empower young people like yourself to go into political activities and advocacy, become active in civic life. Maybe you can take advantage of some of these.
I mean, I'm sure that they are present. I'm sure the Independent Party has that, the Republican Party has that, but I don't necessarily think that that would be something. There are the resources there, but I have been working on political campaigns for quite some time. I remember back when I was in high school, I was knocking doors for a mayoral candidate for New Haven. Last summer, I was in Senator Chris Murphy's office in Washington, D.C., taking phone calls from constituents, helping the aides there draft memos and things of that sort. So while those resources do exist, and I'm sure whichever party may come to mind has an agenda that they want to push forth in terms of invigorating the youth, I'm not necessarily doing it for that. The only end goal I have in mind is helping the people I grew up with.
But it does seem that you've developed some great national contacts as well as local and state contacts, so that no matter what happens in this race, you'll have an understanding of how the state and local and national forces fit together for funding purposes, for social programs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have something to follow up very quickly. Namely, I was going to ask you, what would you recommend to people of other ethnic origins, like the Turks, perhaps, who are aspiring to go into politics? What some words of wisdom might you have?
American youth, if you
Definitely.
want.
Yes, yes, American youth, very good. Yeah.
So, okay, to the first question from Mr. McKay,
Yes.
I have, over the years, grown an affinity towards politics and learned a lot about the inner workings of the city, of the state, and the classes I take at Yale are taught by some of the most talented people in their fields, and I do learn a lot about those things. But this goes back to the answer I'd given a minute ago about how, although the city does work with the state in terms of grants and what have you, my motivation is not to find out how Washington D.C. allocates resources to California. I only care about what I have in front of me, and until that goal is reached, I won't look towards anything else. And to the second question about Mr. Oktay, I think that it's a very possible outcome for people in my generation, millennials, to start becoming more involved with their city and involved with local politics, or even statewide politics. I know that the youngest representative in Connecticut was elected about a year or two ago, a Republican who was 18 years old, who by far was the first one to break that ceiling. But I think that with the millennial generation becoming in a position to voice their concerns, it is imperative that everyone puts forth their ideas and their thoughts onto the table and motivates others to create change. And in terms of Turkish Americans specifically, the reason why I love the country that I was born and raised in is because your ethnic background or your religious background, any sort of background, does not matter. At the end of the day, everyone is, at least we try to treat as equals. Whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, whether you're Buddhist, doesn't matter. You should always try to have a say in what is affecting you, your community, and people around you every day.
Well, I couldn't be prouder of those answers, Hacıbey. I think you were just the types of things that are closest to our hearts, which is a good life for all people of whatever race, ethnic background, or religion. I think that's very close to everybody's heart at this table here, and I think in our listening audience is that we are very concerned about the well-being of all people, all Americans, and you could have taken a different point of view, but you gave the right answer, and I think it bodes very well for you, and I hope the listening audience hears these comments and loosens up their pocketbooks a little bit to help you out. And
make a note of what's appearing at the bottom of your screen now.
Yes.
You can make some donations.
And if I could close in on saying one thing, it'd be that I have grown up watching my parents struggle to try and pave a road for me and my siblings, and there's no day that I never try and take that for granted, and the most immediate way I can give back to them and give back to the community that helped me go to where I am today, that being Yale University, I can only do this with the support of the people on my team, with the support of my family, and with the support of the people watching behind the screen right now. And one way you can support me is by going on my website, hajiforward1.com/donate, and donating. And if you can't donate with dollars, you can donate with your ideas and your advice. And if you want to reach out to me, there's a tab to do that as well. And I'd like to thank Mr. Oktay again for inviting me here today. This was definitely an experience. I'm only 19 years old, so this was one of the first times, or this was the first time I've had an interview of such caliber. And yeah, thank you very much.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you. So good luck to you in your endeavors, and we hope to be able to see you up there climbing the ladder.
And then be a guest of us.
Yes, yes.
Hopefully. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Very good.
We would like to take a short break now, and we'll be back right after.
Welcome back to our session on the TV forum, session 2, if you will. And in the previous session, we talked about current events, which involved a young Turkish politician who is seeking a public office. Now we'll be talking about recent events that relates to the general TADA field of interest. And for that, I'd like to introduce Enis Bey again. He is the Director of Communications, Director of Communications of TADA. And so you have the floor, Enis Bey.
Thank you very much. Merhaba sayın seyirciler. Hello, dear friends. I wanted to discuss a subject with you today that most of you have probably heard about the details of what transpired. So I would like to take this opportunity to touch upon the incident that happened on May the 16th in front of the Turkish ambassador's residence in Washington, D.C. during the visit of President Erdoğan to Washington. In doing so, I wanted to preface my remarks by making 3 points. Number one, what I have to say has nothing to do with politics, either Turkish, American, or any other. It has everything to do with equal application of justice. Number 2, my remarks should not be construed to imply guilt or innocence to anybody. If any Turkish background demonstrators that were present there engaged in unlawful activity, they should be tried in a court of law, and we'll let the court determine whether that was lawful or not. So I'm not advocating for anybody's guilt or innocence. And finally, the issue before us should be one where we keep an open mind and we should not jump to conclusions. I would like to begin by laying the groundwork for what transpired that day. As you may have read in the news, President Erdoğan came to Washington to meet with President Trump. During their meeting in the White House, there were demonstrations outside in Lafayette Park by both pro and anti-Turkish demonstrators. Once their meeting was done, President Erdoğan's and his itinerary, I believe, was public knowledge, or at least known by the press, was going to leave the White House and go to the Turkish ambassador's residence to give a courtesy call to the ambassador. Turkish demonstrators, or Turkish American or pro-Turkish demonstrators, had obtained permits to be demonstrating outside the Turkish ambassador's residence well in advance of that date. And what happened was a group of the anti-Turkish demonstrators who had lawful permits at Lafayette Park, which is several miles away from the ambassador's residence, decided they were going to go and confront the Turks who were demonstrating there, or the pro-Turkish demonstrators, and demonstrate against Erdoğan, which is their right. They had not applied for a permit from the National Park Service, which has control of Sheridan Circle. Sheridan Park, and they had not applied for permit from the DC Police Department, unlike the Turkish side. Now, under DC municipal regulations, they were not required to, because they were under 50 people involved in the incident, so on their part. So the only thing that the DC municipal regulations require was that they not block either vehicular or pedestrian traffic. And as you will see from the videos that we're going to show, they definitely did that. To give you an idea, I'd like to show you a diagram of the area where the incident transpired. This building here is the Turkish ambassador's residence. Up until several years ago, this was actually also the embassy. This is Massachusetts Avenue. It goes right around Sheridan Circle Park. It's a major thoroughfare in Washington, D.C. On this side, adjacent to the ambassador's residence, were the Turkish demonstrators. And across the street were largely anti-Turkish, pro-PKK, PYD, the joint Kurdish terrorist organizations. The star denotes where President Erdoğan's limousine came. He came in the driveway, and that's the entrance to the ambassador's residence. The distance from where the anti-Turkish demonstrators decided that they were going to demonstrate is less than 50 feet from that driveway. So, to begin with, there were insufficient police officers present, both DC Metropolitan Police and uniformed United States Secret Service officers which guard the diplomatic missions. Obviously, had the Kurdish demonstrators given notice that they were intending to counter-demonstrate, law enforcement might have taken additional steps. But that really doesn't excuse the lack of protection, adequate protection, to have prevented the melee that happened. The reason being, only a little over a year ago, in April of 2016, last year, when President Erdoğan had come to Washington previously, the same anti-Turkish Kurdish demonstrators had demonstrated in front of Brookings Institution and had created an incident over there as well. In fact, towards the end of my presentation, you're going to see that video. You're going to also see that some of those people are the very same people that were involved in attacking the Turkish demonstrators at the beginning of this incident. So, if the past is prologue, by any reasonable standards, there should have been better protection from law enforcement. Thank you. Now, what happened after the incident, as you will see in a second, is it was a two-part incident, basically. Initially, what happened is those demonstrators came into the middle of Massachusetts Avenue, started throwing objects such as water bottles at the pro-Turkish demonstrators. You will actually see them hit one of the Turkish police officers in the head. So imagine a full water bottle. If the pointed side of it had come to the man's eye, it could have taken out an eye, which in itself is assault with a dangerous weapon. Contrary to common belief, it's not assault with a deadly weapon. It doesn't have to be a knife or a gun, but a weapon which can inflict bodily harm. Could be anything from a rock to a stick, or or any other object, such as a water bottle.
If I may interject, you mentioned Turkish police. I think you meant the guard, guards for the presidential guard.
Exactly. One
Yeah.
of the presidential detail members. You'll see him. He is in black jacket with a tie.
Thank you.
So, anyway, you will also see eventually in the second video that that was not the only item. They were not the only items thrown. They actually had thrown megaphones. They had split the head, the skull of a pro-Turkish demonstrator, and you will see his photo with blood running down his face. And they also engaged in a physical altercation. You will see some of them kicking the Turkish demonstrators. And this is occurring right in the middle of Massachusetts Avenue. So I ask any reasonable person, of course they have a right to demonstrate. Of course they have a right to express their opinions, but when is the line crossed? Does that right give them the right to go into the middle of Massachusetts Avenue to throw missiles and objects at other demonstrators, the pro-Turkish demonstrators? And yet, anyway, I will go on to that, but the second part of the incident is where the pro-Turkish demonstrators have had enough. And unfortunately, they go after the Kurdish antagonists.
Before we go into that, if I may interrupt
Sure,
again, if you
sure.
don't mind, I read someplace that, I mean, when the, in fact, there was a Kurdish lady, I understand, who was throwing water bottles and so on and so forth, that at that instant, the Turkish demonstrators, pro-Turkish demonstrators, let me put it this way, they started singing rather than responding in kind. I think it was after the megaphone that was thrown, which caused blood pouring from this person. Then I think they decided that they would, you know, attack.
It escalated.
Yeah, yeah. So I just wanted to, you know, insert that.
Sevgin Bey, you're absolutely right. And, you know, that is the unfortunate situation because of the lack of adequate police coverage. And you'll see the police officers, the ones who are there, they're trying their best to keep everybody on the sidewalk out of the street, but there just aren't enough of them. So, yes, to go to that Kurdish lady, she's one of the ones who threw the water bottles. And you will also see a video of her after the incident is over, claiming to be a victim. In fact, that Turkish lady,
Kurdish?
Kurdish, yeah, Kurdish lady who did the assault and who claimed to be a victim, if apparently some folks had gone onto her website before she took down her Facebook page, and there were references to anarchists, and there was actually a diagram of the Unabomber on her Facebook.
Somebody ordered them and they just attacked us. We had the elderly, we were the women are there, and we had the kids with us. And they didn't mind. I saw the little girl on the floor, on the ground.
Or so the Facebook posts state. I didn't see her Facebook before she took it down. But in any case, to move on, within hours of the incident, oh, by the way, this entire incident was well documented. It was recorded by the media. Voice of America had some excellent footage, their Turkish service. Anadolu'da, the Anatolian news agency, had some very good footage. And I will show you excerpts from those as well. But what the Armenians did, the Armenian National Committee of America, ANCA, A-N-C-A, is they took the Voice of America video. Remember now, this is a two-part incident. First, there's the attack and the assault by the anti-Turkish demonstrators against the pro-Turks. And then the Turks respond. They redacted the video, took only the part, the second part, where the Turks go after the Kurdish demonstrators, and gave that to all the media. In fact, the major news, one of America's major newspapers, the Washington Post, put that video on their website and gave credit to Anka, the Armenians, for having provided the video. So you will see that too. In fact, first let's go with the video by Anka that was given, the still shot from the Washington Post that gives credit to them. That will be the first document that I will show. The second video is the one by Voice of America Turkish Services. There you will see what transpired, and you will see the missiles being thrown at the Turks and the Turkish man with the blood running down his head. And in fact, I also had prepared a PowerPoint presentation which we will show you, where I took still shots of those to document who was doing it, with arrows pointing at them and arrows pointing at the missiles. So take a look at that and tell me if you agree with the Chief of Police, DC Metropolitan Police Chief, Peter Newsham, who the very next day, less than 24 hours after the incident, before any investigation was probably even started, let alone concluded, makes a public press briefing along with Mayor Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., and they both refer to the Kurdish side as peaceful demonstrators. Now, I don't know if they saw the relevant footage or not. Let's listen to Chief Newsham in his own words in his press briefing.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me at the Metropolitan Police Department's headquarters here in Washington, D.C. Yesterday afternoon, we witnessed what appeared to be a brutal attack on peaceful protesters at the Turkish ambassador's residence in the 1600 block of 23rd Street Northwest. As a result of the assault, 11 people and 1 police officer were injured. 9 of those who were injured were taken to local hospitals where they were treated and released. This incident required additional police resources, involvement from our partners at the DC Fire and EMS, and extended road closures during our evening rush hour in the area of Sheridan Circle. We were able to make 2 arrests on the scene. 49-year-old Eaton Nesme of Woodside, New York was arrested and charged with aggravated assault. 42-year-old Jalal Karaboy of Fairfax, Virginia was arrested for assault on a police officer. The Metropolitan Police Department has not concluded our investigation. We intend to ensure that there is accountability for anyone that was involved in this assault.
We are here to provide an update on the violent confrontation that happened outside of the Turkish ambassador's home last month. As many of you may remember, on May 16th, the Turkish president and foreign minister attended official meetings here in Washington, D.C. Turkish security and diplomatic personnel accompanied the Turkish president and foreign minister during their trip. During the course of the official visit, Turkish security personnel and others assaulted peaceful protesters in the District of Columbia. U.S. law enforcement officers as well during this incident in Sheridan Circle in Washington, D.C., located directly across from the ambassador's residence. 9 protesters in Sherman Circle were injured during this vicious attack. As I've said before, I condemn this attack It was an affront to our values as Washingtonians and as Americans, and it was a clear assault on the First Amendment. As Americans, the First Amendment grants us the right to assemble and protest peacefully. And here in D.C., we are committed to safeguarding and protecting that right.
After the briefing, there was an investigation conducted. I'm going to read to you from the affidavit in support of an arrest warrant prepared by Detective Victor J. De Peralta, a sworn member of the Metropolitan Police Department, Washington, D.C. for 9 years, assigned to the Criminal Investigations Division, 2nd District Detectives Unit. In it, he says that they identified who was the person that actually threw the megaphone which split open the Turkish demonstrator's head. I'm reading here from page 6 of his 17-page affidavit. In the ensuing melee, one of the anti-Erdoğan protesters, Kasım Mollaoğlu, threw a megaphone at Alp Kenan Dereci, a pro-Erdoğan Canadian citizen, after Mr. Dereci punched Celal Hayrabadi, another anti-Erdoğan protester. Now, I can understand the emotions coming into play. But if I'm in the Turkish group and one of my brethren was getting assaulted, my response would have been to try to break it up rather than committing assault with a dangerous weapon, the megaphone, against the perpetrator. Or, failing that, to call the nearest police officer and say, this man just wounded a pro-Turkish demonstrator. But this man, according to the police officer, to the detective's affidavit, Kasım Mollaoğlu, takes matters in the law into his own hands, so to speak, and hits Mr. Dereci with a megaphone, causing him to bleed profusely. I mention all of this because out of this incident, once the investigation was completed, there were warrants issued against numerous Turks, I believe 19 of them, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, of these, I can tell you that 2 were Turkish Americans, and 1 was a Canadian, Turkish Canadian citizen. And plus there were 9, I believe, warrants issued for members of the Turkish President Erdoğan security detail who were involved in the affray. Yet, not one anti-Turkish demonstrator who is documented in the videos you have just seen, who are shown there, assaulting the Turkish side, not one was arrested. I beg your pardon, there was one arrested. It was Mr. Celal Hayrabadi, the guy that Mr. Dereci allegedly punched, according to the detective's affidavit. So I would like to read to you the one demonstrator that was arrested. And initially the charge he was arrested for was assault on a police officer, to wit, a District of Columbia Metropolitan Police officer. This is from the, we call it the Gerstein. It's a document by Officer Thomas Morgan, and I'm sorry, Morgan Thomas. And in it, it says clearly that Officer Lee, L.E., badge number 2766, reported that he was struck in the face by Celal Karaboys. They misspelled Mr. Karabadi's last name, put an O instead of a D, right closed fist, while he was trying to separate protesters in Sheridan Circle. W1, which is Officer Lee, had 2 lacerations, wounds, on the bridge of his nose. W1 stated that he called for more officers to assist him when Mr. Karabadi engaged in a physical confrontation with him. W1 handcuffed him, and because Mr. Karabadi complained of an injury to his right elbow, was transported to Sibley Hospital for treatment. So this demonstrator is arrested for punching a DC police officer in the nose. By the way, this is the same guy that was involved in the blue shirt in the fight in the middle of Massachusetts Avenue with the Turkish demonstrators. The man that his accomplice, Kasım Molol, apparently was trying to save by throwing and hitting another demonstrator in the face with a megaphone. Well, guess what? In looking at the court records, I just found out that 3 weeks ago, on July the 14th, the government quietly, on a Friday, so press is usually not active on the weekends, dismissed the charge against Mr. Karabadi. Just dropped it. Dismissed. The United States Attorney's Office of the District of Columbia filed a dismissal for the incident that led to the arrest. Interesting. Not only were none of the anti-Turkish demonstrators arrested for assaulting the Turks, but the only one who was arrested for assaulting a police officer was...
This almost doesn't seem possible in America, does it? It's so unbelievable.
Well, sir, if I so much as, which I would not do, but if I so much as were to spit on a police officer, I know.
You know what would happen.
I would be going into Moscow. So it leads me to wonder, is this because they're trying to live up to their new best friend in the whole wide world, the Kurds? Does he work for some kind of an agency that cannot be mentioned? Why were the charges dropped? I hope, Sevgin Bey, that after this program, that you extend an invitation to both DC Police Chief Peter Newsham and to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia to come and explain.
Absolutely. We'll be more than glad to do that.
I know that the U.S. Attorney's Office cannot comment on an ongoing criminal prosecution, which is where the Turkish case is. But certainly they should be able to give a reason why they dropped the charges against this man who assaulted a police officer.
Exactly, right.
But this probably the Turkish ambassador and these individuals who are now charged with assault, in their defense, will bring forth all these facts and will probably also go back to unredacted version of that video taping, which might help this case.
Again, but going by the same principle, if they did commit assault, I'm talking about the Turks who were arrested, it's not a viable defense unless your own personal safety is in danger to assault somebody else. Just like with that Kasım Molol hitting the other guy with a megaphone on the head, to say that, well, they were assaulting other Turks, so I decided to take the law into my own hands. We're not justifying that. But what I'm asking is, why were there none of the other side charged?
I think that should be underlined. And also, of course, you know, when somebody is on the ground, you don't kick him. So when somebody acts in that manner, then he should be also, you know,
brought before the court.
Exactly.
But I will conclude, if you don't mind,
sure, please.
Yes. This very question was asked of DC Police Chief Newsham at the news conference that he held on June the 15th, announcing the warrants that were issued against the Turkish side. At 20 minutes 9 seconds into his press conference, you will hear a member of the press ask the following question. Quote, "There's a Turkish man impacted and heavily wounded by one of the quote-unquote peaceful protesters there. Is there a legal process underway against that heckler?" A question to which Police Chief Newsham, he evades the question by replying, quote, "I think that question is the types of questions that get into a little bit into the evidence. I'm reluctant to go into any evidentiary questions in public. Those are the types of issues that I think that can be, you can look at the court documents, which I have, when the folks are presented. Like I said, someone will be presented today. Those documents will become public. Then the rest of it will become public when these cases proceed through the criminal justice system," which is no answer as to why they were not arrested. I would like to conclude by pointing out the following video from the March 31st, 2016 Brookings Institution incident. And if you look at it, you will see, again, the Kurdish demonstrators who are across the street from the Brookings Institution. In between them, again, is Massachusetts Avenue. Brookings Institution, for those who are not familiar, is about a mile from the Turkish embassy. Crossed the street, the boulevard, and again attacked the Turks. You will see a man with a stick in his hand doing that. And I will conclude by simply saying, take a look at the photos of those two men. Are they the same people? That's why people who break the law, regardless of their ethnicity, should be prosecuted. Because if they're not prosecuted today, what's to stop them from doing the same thing tomorrow? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well said. I will also conclude this particular session before we go on to the next session by saying that the viewers, please, the reason for having TADA platform is precisely because if such events happen to take place in your neighborhood, please feel free to come up and let's discuss it. Okay, thank you, and we'll rejoin you at the next session. Welcome back to our last session of this TV forum, TADA TV forum. You will recall that we talked about in the first session about the current events, where we highlighted a young Turkish politician who is running for office. And in the second, we talked about a recent event, namely what had taken place in front of the Turkish ambassador's residence back in May 16th, I believe it was. And now we are going to connect those to the events that have occurred a century ago. So on that, I'll turn to Bob, if you would be so kind to talk about the recent events and how they may tie to the events of 100 years ago.
Well, I was enthralled with Mr. Pınar's presentation regarding the events in Washington, because it was a picture of turmoil. Now, that's the same thing that happened during World War I, turmoil. And the people that benefit from turmoil are dictators and bad people. And I do believe Russia is involved in a lot of activities because the Russians have been in control of Armenia, their outlets, and they have used Armenia as a foil to get world recognition and to achieve goals that are anti-Turkish, anti-USA, and I would just say to Mr. Pınar that because of my experience in Turkey, President Erdoğan would never have allowed President Trump to be treated in Turkey the way President Erdoğan was treated in Washington, D.C. It was a disgrace. There wasn't adequate police, as you pointed out, and people who were committing turmoil, throwing things, and hurting Turkish people went unpunished. And so we see in the Armenian Weekly that within hours, the Armenian National Committee of America is trying to promote resolutions in the U.S. Congress that would speak very poorly against the Turkish people. It's unfair. It's not right. It's House Bill 354. It's a disgrace to the United States that this bill is even in there. Now, if you read the Armenian Weekly, as I have, you'll notice that the people who are pushing for House Bill 354 are from California and from Massachusetts. These are states in the United States that have high density of Armenian people. And it's too bad that our politicians don't know the background of World War I and how it has affected us, even though they should. Now, Sevgin Bey, it's going to be impossible for me to discuss the full implications of what you asked me to discuss today because we've had such a great program today. But I want to mention a couple of things that might tie some of these things together a little bit.
Excellent.
Needless to say, Sevgin Bey is an author, and he's written numerous pamphlets about numerous subjects regarding ethnic relations. Let me put it that way. And I would venture to say that there have been thousands of books written about the World War I period in history that related to Turkish, Russian, Jewish, Kurdish, Armenian issues, to be very specific. And they relate to the United States because during this period the Sixth Fleet was there. Relates to France because the French were trying to take over part of Anatolia. Relates to the Greeks because the Greeks were invading what was left of the Ottoman Empire. As a matter of fact, when I mentioned the word turmoil, I don't know how any Turk survived World War I. I mean, 25% of the people died. That was a disaster. And yet we hear from Armenian groups primarily about what happened to them. And
3 minutes.
And they would like us to believe that they were the subject of a genocide, which absolutely is not true. I mean, for anyone to think so is terrible. But in the three...
They could read the Katsunun's book,
well,
right?
That's not really the point,
Okay.
Sevgin Bey. yes, they can read that. They can read any one of the thousands of books. But this book, among all others, is more important. This book is extremely important because the Armenian diaspora had gathered up all copies of the Armenian leader's speech from around World War I and destroyed them. And in this book, it documents in the Armenians' own words the fact that there was no genocide, that the Armenians had allied themselves with the Russian government, that they were terrorists attempting to overthrow the Ottoman Empire at that time, and they laid out a plan for this type of activity to continue. So no matter what any of the thousands of other books say, when you listen to the first president of the independent Armenian Republic out of his own words, Havanis Kaçtanuni, this book will clearly point out that there was no genocide, that they were combatants, and this one copy was found in the Russian archives and has been interpreted, and our viewers should ask for it from us, but only on the condition that this book gets into the hands of decision makers who want to know the truth about World War I and today's events, which we're going to have to cover at another time,
Yes,
because what I want to launch into is explosive. It covers terrorism in the United States with figures from the FBI and lies that are well documented in the Armenian file. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I will add that, I mean, after all, this is the kind of thing that we want to get into in subsequent TV forums that we'll be taping. Namely, that we want to get into a discussion of what really happened during the First World War, as Bob was just pointing to. And in order to be able to do that, give justice to that, we have to have another TV forum, which we will in about a month's time, and we will delve into that.
Could I make one more remark, Sevgin Bey, before you conclude? I also would like to express our gratitude to Turkish Channel TV, whose website was recently hacked. This means that we are making waves, we are reaching a global audience, so we're probably making a difference. People hear about this. And please support the website. And you've seen examples of Turkish young Turks running for office. This should be an encouragement for all young Turks. Hopefully we can repeat this and build on it.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you.